Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Dolan, and this is my third oral presentation for Geology 105. The topic I'll be discussing today is the time period known as the Devonian period. I hope I can give an in-depth look into the climate, geography, and life on Earth that was present during this portion of our Earth's history. The Devonian period was the fourth period of the Paleozoic era, and it occurred between 416 million and 358 million years ago. It was preceded by the Silurian period and followed by the Carboniferous period. Although it was marked by other significant events, the Devonian period is mainly known for its marine life and is often referred to as the Age of Fishes. The first topic concerning the Devonian period that I'd like to take a little deeper look into is the Earth's geography during this time period. A supercontinent called Gondwana occupied the majority of the southern hemisphere at the beginning of the time period, but as time went on, it started to drift more northward. Later in the Permian period, it actually ended up colliding with another supercontinent, Euramerica. The collision of those two continents led to the formation of the supercontinent we all know, Pangaea. Another collision between Euramerica and a smaller northern continent, Siberia, led to the formation of the Appalachians, the northern part of the Appalachians, and also the Nordic mountains. These mountains were rapidly eroded, which contributed lots of the sediment that went down to the lowlands and the shallow ocean basins. The sea levels were generally pretty high, and much of the western part of North America was underwater. As for the climate during the period, the inner part of the continent, those regions were generally pretty warm and dry. The next topic that I'd like to talk about would be, as I noted earlier, the marine life during the Devonian period. As I said earlier, the Devonian period was highlighted by the growth and evolution of fish during this time period, as well as other underwater organisms. These organisms include underwater plant life like reefs. The Devonian period was actually a huge time for reef building. There's extensive reefs in the shallow waters that surrounded the continents, or each of the continents, as well as the body of water that was still between Gondwana and Euramerica, as they hadn't quite collided yet. One of the most prominent fish during the Devonian period was the placoderm, which is the placoderm is often characterized as the armored fish, and it underwent wide diversification and ended up being one of the dominant predators under the water. Placoderms didn't have any actual teeth, but their jaws, combined with the bony structures that they had in their mouth, allowed them to attack their prey. During this era, some of the placoderms could grow up to 33 feet in length, so they got pretty big. By the mid-Devonian era, the fossil record shows evidence that there were two new groups of fish that actually did have bones and teeth and had other characteristics we associate with common fish, like gills and swim bladders. The ray-finned fish were the ancestors of most of our modern fish, and some other species that started to become a little more common towards the end of the Devonian era included sharks and other types of rays. So another topic worth discussing is the plant life during the Devonian era. Because the supercontinents Euramerica and Gondwana were closest to the equator, the climate of the Devonian era was very warm, which made life on land particularly good for the plants. Um, they evolved throughout the entirety of the era and actually eventually developed the ability to carry water and food through roots and leaves. So this evolution was an important characteristic to develop, um, but it was not even the most important development that plants had during this time period because the seed became relevant. So now plants weren't dependent on the presence of water for reproduction, and with this being the case, they could start moving further inland. Um, Ferns and some of the first trees began to cover the land when this started to happen. The considerable growth in the number of land plants and trees throughout the era also led to an increase in oxygen levels because there are more trees. This proved to be vital in the development of like land animals, which leads to another topic worth covering, which is terrestrial animals, so animals that live on the land. And they weren't all that prevalent during this era, but there were a few species that were worth noting. The plant-covered lands made a good home for the first wingless insects and spiders. And as for animals, early tetrapods, which are four-footed vertebrae, which most likely evolved from a type of fish called the lobe-fin fish. They were able to use their fins to like hop out onto land, get out of the water, and they without predators and with all the food that was available on the new wetlands, it was a good environment for them to eat. At the close of the Devonian period, what is considered the second of the big five mass extinctions actually happened. Rather than it being just one event, it's known, or it's said to have had some, or at least two prolonged episodes where species went extinct. And the Kellwasser event, which was in the middle of the Devonian period, was largely responsible for the extinction of the coral reefs that I talked about earlier, as well as the jawless fish. And the Hagenberg event, which was at the boundary towards the end between the Devonian and the Carboniferous boundary, it killed off most of the placoderms that I talked about and most of the early ammonites. Causes of the extinctions are often debated, but some may be related to the cooling climate from the CO2 depletion, which were caused by the first forests that were beginning to spread. And then, although up to 70% of the non-vertebrate species died, terrestrial plants and animals were largely unaffected by the extinction events. I hope I've given you guys better insight into what occurred during the Devonian period and what the climate and animal life was like. So, thanks.